So, gentlemen, thanks a lot for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you. We hope you are going to share some interesting thoughts about what's happening in the industry. And thank you in advance for helping us understanding how quantum computing is transforming the pharmaceutical industry now. Before we head to the discussion, I just wanted to share with you a few insights about some of the key learnings on the pharma industry. First of all, just to recognize the fact that pharma is one of the strong players when it comes to innovation. And in the last 10 years, there has been more $1 trillion that has been spent on R&D. So of course, all that money has been translated into, new drugs discovery. More than 500 new drugs were actually launched. Half of them were actually completely new and innovative drugs, meaning that actually they were the first or in their class of action. So innovation is at the core of what pharma does, and this will continue, and this will continue to help also save some patient lives. Now, what we saw during the pandemic is that there is a process that is actually accelerating on the R&D. And you've probably saw that we've been able to launch mRNA vaccines in less than a year. The previous record was actually 4 years. So really massive innovation and acceleration of R&D. At the same time, we also see that there are some tech transformation happening in the industry, and that technology is really about now becoming a core engine of R&D acceleration through a combination of internal and also partnership ecosystem. So more and more drug discovery deals between pharma companies and artificial intelligence startups are now about to be announced, sometimes above $1 billion in total in milestones. So quantum has the potential to further accelerate that R&D and increase even more the level of innovation. So for instance, by helping solve drug discovery, also by helping, having a better understanding of drug structure and the biochemical reactions to discover faster, better, safer drugs. So we see now the impact of all that, and we can probably anticipate, very similar or even higher level of disruption in the future once the quantum computing is fully mature. But there are also some challenges that comes to that, and making it a reality will be quite complex. So now, what we'd like to hear from our panelists are how they are thinking about quantum computing in their organization, what are the potential success stories that they can tell about, what are the challenges that they are facing, and how do they translate that potential into value, and ultimately for the sake of the better patient lives. So now let's start with our panel, and I will start with Gopal for the first question. And great if you can actually introduce yourself and your organization. So Gopal, the first question for you would be around the use cases. So where do you see right now, the most potential use cases in the life science industry? And can you tell us a bit more about what has happened in the last few months in your organization?
Sure. Thank you, Xavier, and thank you, Q2B, for inviting. So my name is Gopal Karemore. I'm a director of digital and research intelligence of a company called Novo Nordisk. It's a Danish multinational pharma company working mostly for diabetes and hemophilia, but we are also expanding to the other portfolios such as CVD, CKD, NASH, and others. And my task is basically I'm searching and evaluating and executing all the emerging trends. For example, generative AI, quantum computing is one of them, and see how we can integrate that into the enabling technology so that we can actually increase the potential into the line of business projects. But getting back to your question, Xavier, thanks first of all, Clemens, with your presentation to basically make a premise for audience. We don't have to go in detail with drug discovery and development. But to answer that, I think we should not disregard, because you mentioned about the quantum part, right? So we should not disregard the other quantum technologies like quantum sensing, right, and quantum communication, which would play a significant role in healthcare and life science. For example, quantum sensing, we have a lot of limitation these days about prognostic, diagnostic, effect-specific biomarkers. This is actually the bottleneck in stratifying the patients in clinical trials. So I think the quantum sensing is really promising. And the second thing is about the quantum key distribution, post-quantum cryptography, because we know the NIST guidelines are coming up 2024, Biden administration. So I'm hoping that this will be impacted. I mean, the whole life science and pharmaceutical company will be impacted with this compliance issues on this. So this is also one of the fields that are also very promising. Then coming back to the real game, which is the quantum computing, right? And to understand that, I would have to go back to the Clemens presentation. That's about drug discovery and development, right? I mean, it basically starts with the question, right, for any pharma companies, which disease you want to focus, right? And to understand that, you have to have a mechanistic understanding of a disease progression. And historically, we have known how to do that. We basically do this central dogma of life. We basically understand, replication, transcription, and translation, and all the mechanism around it. And what we get out from this one is basically all this knowledge graph and all this systems biology and stuff like that. But now we have changed because we have got lots of multi-omics approaches, right? We have got genomics, phenomics, metabolomics, proteomics. So it is not a question of big data. It is a question of the complexity of the problem, right? How do you come up with a hypothesis of a disease which is so polygenic, right? It is not a single genetic loci that we are focusing on. It's a very complex. So quantum has some solutions, and there are some publications in the public domain which are actually answering this part. That's the first part. The second part, I would say, is also about the simulation of a molecule, right? And as Clemens mentioned, it is not about the ground state energy calculation. No, we are also interested about all conformations that the molecule can have, right? And that is not an easy problem. I mean, the conformational search and the scoring energy, these are the two quantum problem. It's a quantum bounding problems, right? And it has been proven theoretically that it is impossible for rotamer optimization, for example. It's impossible. So there are some hope for the quantum part there. Then the second part is about the ligand design, right? And I'm talking on behalf of everyone in that way because this is a question to me. But be it a small molecule or antibody, right? These are the two extreme things. We have to think now, and Xavier, you mentioned about the mRNA therapies, and COVID told us that we have to look into some different molecular formats, right? We cannot rely upon the small molecule or antibody, We have to go in between. For example, peptide, antibody, or for example, nanobodies and stuff like that. And to design this one, that's a quantum problem because the permutation combinations are huge. So that is actually one of the promising area where one can invest in the quantum part. Then the last part, or maybe the second last, would be the process optimization. Right, and this is where we talk going towards the development side. So be it production, for example, automations, we have lots of optimization problem that can be solved with the QUBO formulation stuff. And then, of course, the stratification of clinical trials. That's a very classical example. Supply chains, post-commercialization, and stuff like that. That are very important. But the last part, and not least, is the quantum machine learning. Because if you see, machine learning is actually integrated ubiquitously to the entire drug discovery and development pipeline, right? So the quantum machine learning has some hope because if you see, I'm not talking about the discriminative models, but I'm very hopeful about the generative models. Because right now we use a pseudo-random number with a classical computer. So the hope is that if we can utilize, and just want to say that we're going to start a joint postdoc between Novo Nordisk and Copenhagen University. So if you know anybody interested, just let me know. Yeah, so these are actually the whole portfolio of the use cases that can apply from the drug discovery and development pipeline. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gopal. And we've heard that there is plenty of potential, right? Tons of good use cases.
Yeah.
We also heard that Clemens has, some of those answers as well. So now to you, Clemens, another question around, in front of this potential and those use cases, what is the level of investment that is actually required, right, to be able to actually tap into that opportunity? And how do you see the balance between kind of internal capability building and external resourcing and partnerships?
So, I mean, I don't need to reintroduce myself, right? Most people have presumably heard me, but there is so much one can do internally, and reversely, so much you can learn with and partner with external. I think there's sort of a core decision one needs to make, and that is, are you early adopter, or are you early follower, or are you late follower? And that will, to some extent, decide how you invest. I think you need a critical mass. If you want to be early adopter, and I think with cutting edge technology that is potentially transformative, you need to be early adopter, because it took us, in fact, the last 3 years to really, with all the research we did, to understand the problem, to truly understand where we and how we can go after the issues at the very core, because there's all the hype, there's so many other things, there's a gazillion things you could look into. And that's something you need to build an internal force. Now, that internal force will not work alone, because obviously there's sort of a couple approaches you can follow. One is you could place this directly into R&D, right? Which has a lot of kind of good, and reversely, but also you're likely applied with the same measures that R&Ds work with every day. Do you want this with applied research or not? That's the reason why we picked the setup we did, to keep the Quantum Lab outside, but extremely strongly tied into what we call the innovation unit, which is R&D, part one. Part two, and I think you need a critical mass, because otherwise you have one guy or girl sitting there alone, right? Whatever, that may or may not help, right? The other option, or the other part, is partnering. There is a gazillion potential partners, right? And pick your partnering approach. We picked ours to really find, for each use case, the partner we believed in has the best knowledge to help us with, where we can really work on equal foot and eye-to-eye level. Because there's certain things that we can't do ourselves, and we know that, right? I mean, how much can you do with whatever 5 people internally? You can do so much more and scale so much better together with great partners, be it QCiver, be it PsyQuantum, be it Google, be it U Luxembourg or UF Toronto, right? We picked them on purpose after various criteria, and next to knowledge, I think the most important there is, especially if you go into research, is it needs to humanly fit. That may sound like the obvious one, but like, you can have the best researchers in the world, right? If they battle themselves on ego grounds, it's not gonna get you anywhere. So we really looked at them. Would they buy into also the larger purpose of like, hey, again, right? I'll not wake up in the middle of the night because we found an algorithm that needs 1 qubit less. There's plenty of companies that will do that, and rightly so, because if I build a box, that's my business. Our business is something else. And we wanted our partners to really understand this, that there is actually a big purpose behind all this. And quantum is a mean to get there, an amazing mean. It's actually the coolest technology on earth. I'm a tech guy, right? I love quantum, as many other things, but at the very end, there's a purpose behind. And then there's other approaches, right? I mean, if I just look into other German companies, and I'm not saying there's any, they are just different, right? There's people that help to build ecosystems, super important. There's people that go after funding university chairs, super important, right? To bring, so I think one also needs to look at the entire ecosystem of the country, and which game you want to play in, right? Which piece, and that will decide it. If you go into it, I mean, I tried to do this call for action here, I do it again, and then I'm done with my answer, is like, you need to buy into research. Like, this is the only thing that will make it happen. So chances are that that algorithms fall from heaven or grow as mushrooms. I think that's pretty small. If you go in, just be serious about it. And serious means you will have to spend time, money, resource on research. And it's going to be, as every other research, it's going to be ups and downs of research. Like it or not. But like, if you want to ever see quantum advantage, that's the route to go. Helpful? I don't know. We'll see later in when you guys nag us.
Already quite helpful, I think. Thank you so much for the answer. And we heard that there is this kind of very strategic importance of the external ecosystem, and then also the importance of building the internal capabilities. So now for Jens, another question. And actually, Jens, great if you can introduce yourself before answering the question. So, if we really focus on the organizational element, how come you actually start to really create a level of adoption, of excitement, not only with the scientists, but then also with the executives? And how colleagues are reacting, right, when you talk about quantum? It would be interesting to know how this is working at AstraZeneca.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Jens. I work at AstraZeneca, and I work in a part of the business that's called the Emerging Innovations Unit. And what we do is really to bring in the outside world when it comes to innovation. So we look for technologies, projects, new ways of doing things that have sort of an impact horizon on patients on a 5 to 10 year kind of time scale. And that usually means new indications, new ways of measuring cells, but it also means really cross-cutting things such as quantum. So that landed in our in-tray as well. And I have to say, I don't have a background in computational biology or in quantum at all. I'm an immunologist by training, so it has been a really steep learning curve. And I really focus on the opportunities that come out of quantum rather than on the physics and the maths behind it, because they are a little bit beyond my training. But when it comes to the organization, I guess, it's really about two things, as you said. It's about the scientists who are really delivering on the work, and then it's also about kind of the executive decision makers. And for the scientists, what I would say is that there is, as always, a kind of a spectrum of people, right? You have the early adopters on one hand, and then you have the healthy skeptics on the other hand. And I think it's really important that you have a team internally that kind of knows who these early adopters are, because what you really need is to get a little bit of their time to develop these proof of concept studies for emerging technologies, to generate the data that will then really, hopefully, if it's positive, convince the skeptics that this is really something that we should go about. So you need to find those people who are kind of willing to change their way of working and spend a little bit of their time. What I would say there is really the reality of scientists in pharma is that people are extremely busy. And what that really means on a day-to-day basis is they're usually working on things where you can draw a really direct line to patient impact on a kind of defined time horizon. And you're sort of competing with that time that they can spend in their working hours, right? So it's a quite difficult value proposition, and focusing on these early adopters usually works quite well, but that requires people who really know their way around the R&D organization and they're well connected within the company. When it comes to the decision makers, what I would say is that there is really a big education piece that's needed. I think quantum has been lingering in kind of the public domain and in news articles for decades now, and there has been a lot of hype around it, and people, I guess, have been saying that it's like 10 years to impact for the last 30 years or 25 years, and it never really delivered, right? And that is a bit of an image problem, I think, especially in more senior people who have been around in the industry for a longer time. And I think it's also quite important, and that may not be so obvious for people working in startups or smaller companies, to think about how this plays out in a big corporate, right? Because you have a really cross-cutting emerging technologies such as quantum, and you have a lot of senior stakeholders, maybe 30 to 40, and they all make an assessment about their small area or their small piece of the R&D puzzle, right? And they're basically saying, in my particular area, there's not going to be anything in 5 years that warrants an investment now, right? And that filters up to the very top, to the decision makers, and you get all these 40 data points of people basically telling the decision makers, ooh, it's probably a bit too early. So what you really need, I guess, is a team that can change the narrative internally and say, yeah, maybe in these 39 cases out of this, it's a bit too early, but we found this one use case where we could really do a little bit of work, maybe work with an external partner, and start a small program of work to do proof of concept to see how this can deliver in the future, right? So you need to kind of cut through this negativity sometimes that you get often with emerging technologies and really make a clear business case, bring in an opportunity rather than just forwarding papers or conveying information and buying into a hype. So I think that's really important. Be honest, generate the data, and convince people with evidence.
Yeah. So I think with this first round of questions, we've actually discussed about the potential and the excitement and what's out there. At the same time, we all know that there are some practical realities, right, and some challenges. So now back to you, Clemens. I would like to know now, what are the kind of concrete challenges that needs to be addressed, and how do you kind of tackle them, in your organization from a technical and practical perspective?
So I talked briefly about it, right? If you look at quantum, and quantum will very likely not stand alone. It's going to be embedded in this ubiquitously everywhere in existing workflows. Some it will maybe actually completely revolutionize if everything works out kind of how we envision our world. But nonetheless, right? So one thing is actually to start thinking about, like, okay, when you're looking at the use cases, really understand your business. I mean, that's the reason why we are also deeply intertwined and interconnected into drug discovery and whatnot. I mean, there's sort of a reason why we look there. For one, we know it's quantum chemistry, right? Which, if you listen to Feynman and presumably his ideas, then it's kind of logical to look there, right? And then really figure out, okay, which pockets you want to go after. We knew get-go that this was a long-haul journey, right? It's a hedge bet on deep tech, which is something that actually none of us is really used to make a deep tech hedge bet that is like a decade out. But it's something to be aware of, right? And then if we talk about the real problems that exist currently in quantum, I mean, a little bit of I put up earlier in my session, right? But there's quite a bit of small ones next to hardware. Hardware in itself is still a set of truly physical challenges, no matter which technology you look into, right? Be it superconducting qubits, be it photons, be it whatever else, right? Cold atoms. So that's part one. That's the kind of obvious one, because apparently everybody seems to believe quantum is a hardware problem. And it surely also is a hardware problem, but that means surely also is. It's also an algorithmic topic, right? I mean, if my famous statement is just suppose some starship with some alien flies by and drops a quantum box onto us, right? So, and just let's go envision it's going to be 10,000 logical qubits. So everything that Clemens just kind of said, I want, is just falling down. I can tell you, we would treat it like if we were in the Stone Age and someone discovered fire. And said, oh, that's warm, right? It will take years to actually put algorithms on this beast and transform this. It's not like you take an algorithm or a problem that you know today and say, whoop, awesome, box is there. Let's go spin up Qiskit, Circ, whatever you do, and run it. I can tell you it's not going to happen. It will take years. It took us, and the paper is just about to hit archive, it took us 1.5 years with 2 partners and an insane amount of our investment to get a very well-known classical algorithm set, SAP that is, right? So symmetry adapted perturbation theory, onto a quantum box. 1.5 years of work. And we talk about tens of people, thousands of hours. And this is sort of the world that is ahead of us, right? So I'll not worry about hardware, thank you, because I don't want to build a box, right? But I can tell you, there on the algorithmic side, there's a lot to do. And then there's all the other things around it, like how would you embed all that, right? How the heck do I get information out of a quantum box? What type of information you get out, right? Wave function, data point, anything in the middle. Yeah. And then there's, if you look into the academic community, right, there's pretty famous Garnet Chen on state overlap problems. So you need to create some sort of state that you can put on a quantum box, right? And that state is rather pretty close, hopefully, to what you want to get out. Well, someone needs to create that state, right? With all its gifts and other things. How do we efficiently create state? Yeah. Do we do this adiabatically? Do we do this maybe analog? Whatever we do, right? Open. And it's not. I'm not a pessimistic guy. I'm just saying, like, okay, these are the challenges, and this is hard research questions. And for every research question, that's sort of my learning, because I don't come off research, I have to admit. So kind of similar to you, but I don't come even off real academic research. Is like, you have this question ahead of you, and then you start looking into it, and like usually these questions don't tend to answer with binary yes or no. What they do answer with is, here's a shitload of other questions that you need to answer first, after, or in the middle. Yeah. And welcome to research. And so just be prepared for it, right? It's awesome. It's research on the coolest technology that exists on Earth. But it's research. Yeah. So sorry for the lengthy answer, but I'm known to be talking honestly and open about how I feel about this. And then there's a whole other thing that is sort of more gut than heart, or gut and heart than brain. Seriously, I would give my left hand for a couple logical qubits to understand actually what that thing is capable of. Because one thing, and when you design algorithms today, I'm sorry that I'm taking.
No, go ahead. We have some time.
When you design algorithms today, we're in a luxury position that there is math that actually dictates how the box is supposed to work. Right? And that's kind of awesome, because that means you can design an algorithm, and as long as you keep to these math proofs and theorems and lemmas, you can be assured that this thing one or the other way works. Awesome. But no one knows what's going to happen beyond it. So maybe we get 5 qubits and we discover something else that's also possible. I don't know. Because I mean, at the very end, we talk about energies, we talk about light, we talk about many other really, really cool things that happen inside that box. Let's see, maybe there is something else we can do with it. I don't know. And that's kind of exciting. You sit in front of this kind of, I feel like literally, when I explained quantum, I said, you can envision sort of two things, or if you can feel two things. I don't know how many people know the movie called Hidden Figures, NASA, and the ideas of building a computer that would get you on the, that would help to get someone on the moon and back, right? I feel like we are there, like we are not even there. We are still like clamping transistors together to some extent. I mean, it looks fancier, but in reality, it's like that part, right? And the other part is literally sort of fire, right? It's like clack, clack, whoops. It's kind of cool. Like, I'm excited by this technology. I'm sorry, I'm passionate. I'm excited, but I also want to give a holistic view what I think. Sorry.
If I may add, I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is exactly what we had to discuss. It's not only the hardware; it's also the quantum software track, the end-to-end whole stack development has to happen simultaneously, right? And all this, what Clemens says about the algorithm track, this should also happen simultaneously. I just want to tell you that I was actually in this consortium called as a European Quantum Software Consortium. I don't know how many of you are aware of that. I think we need such consortium where not only the hardware we're talking about, but also the software part. So just to have a note on that.
Thank you both. And I think what we've heard is that there is quite a journey right in front of us. At the same time, I'm sure that in the room we also have some, interest of, knowing of, how do you start? So maybe one question then for you, Jens, would be, what are the practical first steps that you recommend if you want to start kind of a journey within an organization?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a difficult one, right? It's a nascent technology, and as a company, there's a really good chance that you really don't have the expertise internally that you need to really even evaluate this properly. And I think Clemens said earlier, even to define what the problem is often quite a challenge, right? There's a lot of hype, and you kind of need to figure out what you want to do. And I think one of the first steps that's really important is to tap into the external ecosystem, because if you don't have it internally, you need to figure out who you can work with externally. And especially, I guess, startups, but also academic collaborations really help there to kind of plug that gap and develop the data that you need then to make an internal investment case, right? And I guess, as was said earlier as well, part of that journey is that you need to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the one, kind of, right? You need to really figure out who you can work with, who delivers the quality that you need, but who you can also speak to, and who speaks the language of your scientists as well, right? So, and that takes time, and it is a long-term kind of thing that you need to develop with a couple of partners, do a couple of proof of concept projects that then may then lead, hopefully, to a bigger partnership along the line, and that is really important in the early stages. Something else that I think has worked really well for us internally is, I guess when I came into this, we had kind of a loose group of people across the business that were interested in quantum, and they were meeting every now and then and exchanging ideas. And what has really helped is pull this sort of momentum together and give it a bit more purpose. So we did an internal working group to publish a white paper for internal purposes, and that really kind of synthesized all the information that was available at the time, and ended with a very company-specific perspective of where we could take this internally. And I think that has really galvanized the internal support and kind of brought out some of these enthusiasts that are hidden in the weeds sometimes, and got them to the fore. And it's really a document now internally that really can spark a lot of conversations, right? I mean, if someone talks about quantum, we can send this to them and say, oh, look, this is what we did, this is what we think we should be doing, and from an investment point of view in the next 5 years, let's discuss. So it's a very powerful tool to have, and it really kind of gets people aligned behind a common goal, rather than just having kind of a loose group of people who are vaguely interested to discuss a paper every month or something like that. So those two things, I would say, external partners, really trying to figure out who you can work with, and then internally trying to find something to find a common goal for people who work in very different parts of the R&D organization, but really want to explore this technology, and you want to learn how best to deploy it in this particular use case that they might be interested in.
Yeah, thank you so much. One final question from myself before we open to questions in the room, and this one is for Gopal, and it's quite a complicated one as well.
Thank you.
Of course,
I'll try.
How do you see, in the future, right, when you think about investing and how much you can win potentially from those investments, how do you see the companies building their IP and building their competitive edge? What's the criteria to actually select and make sure that you're actually building something that is going to put you in a favorable situation in the ecosystem?
Yeah. IPR, this is the biggest, actually, one of the, I would say, main issue with the quantum part, right? Because there'll be a huge, right now, the situation is okay, but when the technology gets mature, IPR will be the huge issue, right? Especially with this space. But to answer your question, I think it's about the, basically, what is the competitive edge, right? How do you compare? That's what your question is about. I think you have to think about, as you also said, about the faster, smarter drugs. And this would be the criteria for many pharma company to judge upon this emerging technologies, right? And as I said before, we have to think out of the box. What are the technologies that would be boosted or reinforced by the quantum part, which you cannot do it on a classical computer, right? And what is the effect of that? That would be, I would say, reduction of R&D cost. That's a main target, right? That would be an evaluation factor. Like, can quantum computing help reduce the R&D cost, which is one of the bottleneck right now for the pharma companies. Second thing is about diversification of the portfolio of the disease area, right? I mean, Novo Nordisk was known for diabetes and hemophilia, but we are diversifying our portfolio. And after Corona, everybody has realized that you cannot bet on one particular disease portfolio, you have to diversify. So can quantum help? Can the technology, that the POC that we're setting up, can we diversify our portfolio, disease portfolio? Another part is about the diversification of the molecular formats, right? I mean, all the low-hanging fruits are gone, actually. Small molecule antibody, there are a lot of saturation in IPR in that space. Can we go to the oligonucleotide? Can we go to the protein and peptides, for example, right? Or antibody antibodies. These are the innovation things. And if the quantum can help, that is the best criteria to really choose a partner and stuff. Yeah, I mean, these are actually the main, I would say, the main important criteria on the basis of which IPR will be based. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. We have a few minutes left. Any questions in the room for our panelists, please?
I was interested in how you would balance looking at what current and near future quantum technology, what pharmaceutical problems current and near future quantum technology can solve, with the blue sky thinking of how can we steer how the quantum ecosystem is going to better solve our problems.
Help me understand you.
Okay. Yeah. So one way you've got current quantum technology, and you know where it's going in the near future, and you know what kind of problems it can solve for you. There was talk yesterday about using the use cases to help steer the industry in where it's going to best support the industry. So I was wondering how you balance that from your point of view.
So, I mean, a very quick answer to this, right? The use cases are finite to a large extent. We know, I mean, like drug discovery is drug discovery, more or less, right? With all sorts of lefts, right? But in reality, that's it. Well, we know how that is supposed to work. Thank you, chemistry. And thank you, physics. So that is sort of the easy part, right? You just have to be in, right? And say, okay, these are the important use cases. This is, I mean, at some point, I guess everybody has understood what these use cases are, and that helps us to steer it, right? And to put stuff transparent out, right? If I don't put out, hey, a resource requirement of 3 days, that's great, but unfortunately, we need like half an hour or a night. That helps to steer, right? I said, I mean, thanks to math, accuracy-wise, we know we'll get there. It's about speed. Because in order to be applicable, it needs to be speedy. And so that helps to steer, right? We need to look at super smart means of embedding, of block encoding, of likely everything we know, plus quadratically, if not exponentially more, and to some extent different ideas, to get it into the speed league, we need to get it. And that's sort of what you need to commit to, right? It doesn't get any different than that in terms of messaging. The use cases are known. Now it's like, get serious.
Yeah, and what I would say is a lot of the startups are really zeroing in on this. I mean, as Clemens said, we kind of know where the big bucks are to be made by startups, and they're obviously focusing on this already. But we are still a couple of years at least away from that really delivering then on a commercially viable basis. Yeah.
But I would say, I mean, generalistic use cases, those are, I mean, regardless of which pharma company you're working for, I think we have a basic questions like ground state energy of a molecule, how to simulate a fermionic Hamiltonian, right? But you know, I mean, what company can do just to have some quantum advantage or at least exclusivity in the space, we can actually go to the different value chain and identify what are the use cases which are very specific to the company, and are there, can you formulate that into the quantum part? I think that would be the edge, competitive edge. I think your question was also that. Maybe that is also one of the way one can think of. Yeah.
I think we had another question over there.
Nicolas Tomaski from Quandela, co-founder and CTO. So thanks very much. I have a question for Clemens. So you mentioned you wouldn't wake up for 1 qubit less, but you will give a hand left for 2 logical qubits. So jokes aside, do you refer to some fundamental science exploration, or in general between thousands of logical qubits and thousands of noisy qubits? Do you see something interesting with few logical ones?
I think it's being able to create real heuristics. That's sort of what I'm alluding to. To say like, hey, get us something that makes this beast really, and I call it the beautiful beast to some extent, right? Because it's kind of so far away, and I mean, if you look at the quantum box, it's usually a cute thing, right? And the shiny, and I don't know. But like, it's really creating those heuristics, because that will help us quite a bit. And obviously, I mean, it's great if you have 1 logical qubit, entanglement with 1. So that's the reason why I said 2, but preferably a couple of them to really see what's possible. Like I think part is also sparking people's minds with like, I can touch this. I mean, I think we couldn't live in a more fortunate time right now. Just happened. Look at what happened with ChatGPT. Yeah. It's actually kind of comparable, because ML, or especially generative models and large language models, were science, and suddenly they were touchable. The reason why all this magic actually unfolded is because OpenAI made it touchable. Yeah. Everybody suddenly could use ML. Everybody could use large language models. I'm not talking about what to do with it, but everybody could play with it. What do you know about it? Get me a poem for a birthday, blah, blah, like many useful things, of course, right? But it's the same thing, and that's, jokes aside, being able to touch this and seeing like how does actually a space of logical qubits behave, be it on 2 dimensions, on 3 dimensions, and with many other things, right? Is there actually things, continuous variable-wise, that we can play with in that real space then? And I think this is what I'm saying. Like, for me, what I meant earlier, right? I'll not wake up because I need in a resource estimate with, be it 5,300 or 1,300 something, 1 less. That is great for a hardware company that has invented something to shave it down. But for me, I need the big jump or the ability to understand the system better, because that will bring us forward. Make sense? Good.
The clock's telling me that we have a couple of minutes left, so maybe we can take another short question with a short answer. Any short question in the audience? Yes, over there.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. I'm Pierre, I'm the CEO and co-founder of C12. So a short question. Do your company have some capabilities in terms of quantum developers, or do you rely on external companies to actually write the quantum algorithm? So do you only have the capabilities on the use cases, or you also are able to write some program in Qiskit and CERT?
Of course.
And, okay.
Of course.
Both,
yeah.
Both. That's the shortest answer ever. It's just 1 word. Well done. Beautiful question. So now
we have time, right?
Yes,
everybody's anyway over time. So
yeah. Another final question, if any. Yes.
I don't know if it's going to be short, but I will try. So, basically, thanks for the insights, actually, and maybe lingering on the use case specifics. So, could be possible that quantum usage would be most applicable within the hit discovery phase of the whole drug discovery pipeline. And is it about searching that huge chemical space faster, or having that the drug or the molecule has the right properties, the desirable properties, to then that it doesn't fail on the later stages. What is really about, you know?
Maybe I cannot. You want to go? Yeah. Go. I mean, as alluded in Clemens, the first slide, right? It was a 10 to the power 60, right? That's the chemical space we're talking about, and that's, by the way, this only small molecule in organic. We're not talking about the antibody sequences, amino acids. That goes 20 to the power k, where the k is the length of amino acids, right? So yes, what you said, the hit detection of, for example, let's say the virtual screening, that is actually the holy grail of, I think, the quantum computing in that way, like for pharmaceutical company. But this is where the quantum advantage can be there. But this is just one criteria. It is actually multi-objective, multi-constraint optimization problem. You don't want to find a one molecule, but that molecule has to be developability, synthesizability, you know, like toxicity, ADME tox. There are so many properties that you need to optimize. Yes, so there is a search space problem, conformational search, and also the optimization. Like how do you, optimize the lead optimization? That is also a problem that can be quantum addressable. So yeah, you're right.
And what I would say is we're not really looking necessarily for doing all of this in silico so that you end up with one molecule and job is done, right? At the moment, we have to synthesize a lot of these molecules, really test them in the lab, because all the predictions that the software makes right now are really unreliable, right? And people know this, and so they're making tens, hundreds, thousands of molecules, test them. And if we can cut down even by, I don't know, 50% of that, that's already huge in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of money spent and time to impact. And I think that's what we are really getting to, right? It doesn't need to be the be-all and end-all in kind of one go. But what we really want is a reduction in the time and a reduction in the number of molecules that we need to make in this process.
And then I add just the last piece. It hopefully will also help us to understand things much better.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we can run FCI today. I mean, if you can afford it, and if you have like 3 atoms, right? I would like to actually have that clarity on much larger systems, and that is what quantum hopefully will be able to give us, right? It's the insight. Insight leads to even better quality than that we have today, and so there is sort of, you can look at the use cases are defined. There's a gazillion of small problems in them that you can go after, and I think just pick your battle.